Long before the desert winds whispered through the ruins of Jerusalem and the scent of cedar faded from the temple's stones, there was a king who walked the line between heaven and earth. Solomon, son of David, anointed not just by oil but by the currents of mystery itself, became more than a monarch. He became a myth, encoded in the architecture of wisdom. His name echoed not merely through the chambers of history, but through the hollows of initiation, of secret rites, and shadowed halls lit only by the flame of inner knowing. Tradition remembers him for the temple, for the throne of gold, and the judgments that parted truth like a sword through shadow. But deeper currents tell of a man who did not just command armies or laws, but spirits and forces beyond the veil. His was not a reign of mere governance, but of command over the fabric of reality, stitched together by sigils, symbols, and sacred sounds. In the silence of the Holy of Holies, Solomon was not praying. He was listening to a voice beyond form, a voice that spoke not in words, but in geometry, in vibration, in fire. The legends, those gossamer veils strung across time by the fingers of mystics and madmen, whisper of Solomon, not merely as a king, but as a threshold, a living paradox, a sovereign who sat on a throne of lions and yet bowed before the silence between syllables. Among the countless relics attributed to him, none hold such tremulous awe as the seal, the fabled ring of Solomon. But this was no mere ornament, no gleaming circlet for royal affectation. It was a cipher, a portal etched with the ineffable names of God, written in a celestial tongue that no alphabet remembers, yet every soul vaguely recalls. With it, he was said to bend spirits, not by tyranny, but by a deeper accord, a pact between the will of man and the code of the cosmos. He called not just jinn from their smokeless fire, but thoughts from the abyss of the unconscious, fears from the underworld, shadows from the dream body of the world itself. In the language of modern psychology, Solomon would not be a magician. He would be an archetype, a mythic embodiment of what Jung might call the magician king, one who straddles the ego and the self, whose ring symbolizes the union between conscious intention and the unknowable depths. But in his time, there were no clinical terms, only symbols, spirits, and doors that opened only to those willing to sacrifice certainty for wisdom. The Testament of Solomon, half mad and half divine, reads like the diary of a man speaking not only to demons, but to fragmented parts of himself, the lustful, the wrathful, the fallen. Each spirit he binds becomes a metaphor for inner struggle, rage turned into fire to power the forge, seduction transmuted into vision, chaos given geometry. And this is what made his temple more than a marvel of stone. To the uninitiated, it was merely a place of worship. But to the initiated, it was a metaphysical machine, a construct of harmonic architecture, where every cubit echoed with sacred ratio, where cherubim veiled not just altars, but deeper laws of reality. The temple was not built for God needs no dwelling. It was built for man, to remind him of his potential to rise, to ascend, to remember. Solomon made the demons build it, not out of vengeance, but out of deeper order. Chaos was given blueprints, shadow was given purpose. In this, he mirrored the ancient teachings of the Chaldeans and Egyptians, who believed that temples were not merely places of devotion, but mirrors of the divine world. Copies of the heavens themselves cast downward through the prism of human will. The jinn he bound were not tortured, they were transfigured. In every hammer blow, every stone laid, their energies were reconfigured into structure, just as the psyche, in the heat of transformation, reshapes its traumas into truths. The very seal itself was rumored to contain a hexagram, the six-pointed star, two triangles, one pointing upward, one down, a symbol of the union between the above and the below, between the spiritual and the material, between man and what he dares to become. It was the star of ascent, the reminder that within every fallen thing is a spark of the divine, and within every divine thing, the potential to fall. The temple, like Solomon himself, was built at this crossroads. Ancient myths blur at the edges, where folklore becomes theology and magic bleeds into psychology. Islamic tradition holds that Solomon spoke the language of birds, not metaphorically, but literally. He understood the vibrational language behind sound, the quantum code behind form. The Sufi mystics later interpreted this as spiritual attunement, that to hear the speech of birds is to hear the subtler frequencies of being. In Kabbalah, Solomon became the vessel of Chokmah, pure wisdom, unfiltered, dangerous. Not wisdom in the moral sense, but the first flash of divine cognition, like lightning in the mind. He is not simply wise, he is overwhelmed by wisdom. It pours through him like fire through glass, fracturing him, shaping him. He asks questions the prophets feared to voice. Where does light go when extinguished? Do angels weep for the lost? Is evil the absence of good, or its necessary mirror? He built the temple not to answer these, but to embody the asking. Its inner chambers, like the psyche, were layered, the outer court for the people, the inner court for the priests, and the Holy of Holies, the Axis Mundi, the center of the world, veiled and forbidden. Behind that veil was not just the Ark, but the unknown, the silent heart of all-knowing. And Solomon, unlike any king before or after, dared to look behind the veil, not just of the temple, but of existence itself. The power he wielded was not sorcery in the vulgar sense, it was gnosis, the ability to interface with reality not through force, but through alignment. Just as the Tao flows not by command, but by harmony, Solomon ruled not by decree alone, but by understanding the invisible strings. The ring, then, was not a tool of domination. It was a key of accord. It resonated with the structure of things. The spirits obeyed him not because he enslaved them, but because he understood them, and in understanding, he gave them form. Even the darkest forces seek containment, purpose, meaning. And Solomon offered that. His knowledge, they say, stretched not just across space, but time. He conversed with beings of flame and beings of light, and in some myths, even with the Watchers, the fallen angels who taught mankind secrets forbidden. He took what others feared and turned it into scripture, stone, and symbol. The temple, thus, was not a monument to faith alone. It was a hymn to complexity, a place where heaven and hell both had a role, where the architecture itself was a riddle, every shadow placed to mirror a star, every echo in the stone designed to awaken the sleeping parts of the soul. In Solomon, we see the blueprint of the esoteric seeker, the one who refuses the comfort of binaries. He is the one who walks into darkness not to conquer it, but to listen. He does not flinch from demons because he knows they speak the truths angels cannot. He does not worship light alone, for light blinds as much as it reveals. Instead, He stands at the threshold, ring in hand, temple behind him, the abyss before him, and speaks the true name, the one that binds, the one that frees. Solomon's wisdom, so often reduced in common law to clever rulings or proverbial sayings, was in truth a labyrinth of cosmic depth, an unfolding symphony of questions more sacred than the answers themselves. His insight did not emerge from idle meditation beneath olive trees, but from the crucible where the eternal opposites collide, spirit and matter, law and liberty, light and shadow. His was not the safe, socially palatable wisdom of sages who seek to appease kings. He was the king, and yet he bowed daily before mysteries even he could not name. This humility before the ineffable is what gave his wisdom its fire. He did not fear to stare into the void. He spoke with it, dissected it, lured it into conversation until it unveiled one more secret. To Solomon, a mystery unasked was a universe unborn. The ancient myths surrounding his insight ripple like echoes through forgotten corridors. In some Eastern traditions, Solomon is said to have studied under angels, not in dreams or visions, but in the waking trance of sacred consciousness, where celestial intelligences reveal themselves to the truly attuned. There are whispers of him walking the threshold of the stars, mapping the heavenly spheres not through telescopes, but through inner gnosis. He charted the harmonics of being, not unlike Pythagoras, though centuries earlier. Each note a principle, each interval a law of creation. He wasn't just curious about the cosmos, he saw the cosmos as mind, a divine thought continually reflecting itself in spiral and symmetry, in birth and decay. He longed to see the mechanics behind the veil, the architecture of God. His questions cut deeper than theology. He did not merely ask who God was, but why God existed in the form he did. Why creation chose limitation. Why duality split the one. Why wisdom must pass through suffering to bloom. He asked why fire purified, why water remembered, why breath animated clay. And the deeper he went, the less his kingdom resembled a palace, and the more it resembled a sanctum, a metaphysical laboratory where angels and demons alike were summoned not as servants, but as informants of a greater pattern. To Solomon, no voice in creation was irrelevant. Even the adversarial, especially the adversarial, had something to teach. And so, in scrolls long buried beneath layers of canonical editing, he is said to have debated with spirits who claimed to predate the stars, who remembered the first dissonance in the music of the spheres, who knew the syllables that fracture light into shadow. This is what made him dangerous to the orthodox. This is what made him immortal to the initiated. Where others drew sharp lines between holy and unclean, Solomon dared to explore the continuum. He understood that all knowledge, even forbidden, can be consecrated by intention. He viewed morality not as a rigid structure, but as a spiral dance of consequence, vibration, and awareness. When he divided the infant before the eyes of Israel, it was not cruelty, but calculus, a ritual designed to stir the deepest instincts of truth. His logic was emotional, and his emotion was precise. Every decision bore the weight of metaphysical consequence. In some tellings, Solomon did not write Proverbs first, but Ecclesiastes. That is, he began with despair and moved toward discipline. He didn't climb to wisdom, he descended to find it. This inversion is critical. Like the alchemists of later ages, Solomon saw that true gold is not mined but transmuted, and the soul, like any substance, requires fire to change. Thus, he immersed himself in paradox. He studied the stars, but also the bones. He wore linen in the temple, but robes of shadow in the chamber of mirrors. He knew the language of birds and also the growl of beasts beneath the earth. His was not the path of purity, but of wholeness, the integration of all aspects of being. And so his attention to detail bordered on the divine. Every brick in the temple had meaning, every scent in his court a symbol. Cedar, hyssop, gold, not mere materials, but ritual signifiers. In every corner of his domain lay a teaching. His court was not a government, but a living mandala. Scholars, magicians, priests, poets, all were summoned not to flatter, but to challenge, to test, to probe. It said Solomon once imprisoned a spirit for telling him only what he wanted to hear. He sought contradiction as proof of truth, dissonance as evidence of deeper harmony. Like a sacred algorithm, he would adjust variables until the unseen principle revealed itself in the pattern. And when the fools opposed him, when the high priests cautioned against his inquiries, when the scribes muttered of heresy, he did not strike them down. He smiled. He let them speak. For he knew that dogma was merely fear wearing the robes of faith. He listened, then answered not with rebuttal, but with vision. He would walk them through the temple and show them how the golden cherubim mirrored the wings of the seraphim in Ezekiel's vision. He would whisper verses that did not yet exist in scrolls, for he had heard them in dreams. He would ask questions so precise that answers folded inward and became revelations. And always he led them to the edge of silence, that place where all wisdom ends and awe begins. Solomon did not just possess wisdom, he embodied the archetype of the seeker. He was the first philosopher king, long before Plato imagined him, a man unafraid to unmake himself in pursuit of the real. His alliances with foreign queens were not political. They were ritual unions of worldviews, ceremonies of cross-pollination between cultures and symbols. Each wife brought him more than beauty or power. They brought myths, gods, dreams of their people. He listened. He let their stories reshape his understanding of truth. And though later scribes would condemn this as idolatry, the mystics knew better. They saw in Solomon a vessel vast enough to hold multitudes, a consciousness that refused to be fenced in by doctrine. Even his downfall, the fall so often blamed on desire, distraction, or pride, was to those with eyes to see a sacred descent, a necessary dissolution before the soul could ascend higher. Just as the temple would fall, just as all sacred forms must eventually crumble, so too did Solomon's mortal arc bend toward entropy. But within that collapse was encoded the seed of renewal. The wisdom he carried was never his alone. It was a current, a frequency, and currents do not die. They pass through conductors. They change form. They find new vessels. Thus, the myths that swirl around his name, from Ethiopia to Persia, from Freemasonic rites to modern occult grimoires, are not exaggerations, but resonances, archetypal reflections of a soul who dared to see God not in abstraction, but in form, not above, but within, a man who spoke with spirits and scribes alike, who meditated on paradox until paradox became path. And so his wisdom, though fragmented by time, and filtered through centuries of reduction, still vibrates. It hums in symbols, in architecture, in ritual, and in the most daring of philosophical questions. What if truth is not a destination, but a pattern? Not a revelation, but a relationship? Solomon knew, and he spent his life mapping that relationship in stone, in silence, and in soul. Solomon did not end. He transmuted. History may say he died, scripture may offer his burial, but the deeper traditions, the veiled voices behind myth and mysticism, whisper of no such ending. They speak of a king who stepped beyond the final veil, leaving not a tomb, but a trail, not a corpse, but a current. In the legends buried beneath the sands of Mesopotamia and etched into the symbols of distant temples, Solomon is not remembered merely as a figure, but as a frequency, a vibration that continues to ripple across the metaphysical planes. His throne may have crumbled, his temple desecrated, but his essence, that divine architecture he embedded into the very grammar of reality, endures, echoing in secret rites, in esoteric philosophies, in the subconscious dreams of those attuned to the ancient pulse. When the first temple fell, stone by sacred stone, many wept for its loss, but the mystics did not. They knew what Solomon had encoded was never truly physical. Every cubit, every cherub, every polished golden artifact was but an outer garment for an inner machine, a device of ascent, a map of the soul's journey back to its source. The temple was not just a house for God, it was a mirror for man. And that mirror, once shattered in the physical world, only magnified its presence in the invisible. Just as the high priest passed beyond the veil once a year into the Holy of Holies, so too did Solomon, according to legend, pass into the inner sanctum of being, where time folds and identity dissolves. Some say he vanished like Enoch, drawn up in whirlwinds of soundless light, where angels build palaces out of names. Others say he sank into the earth, into caverns lined with the archives of the pre-Adamic kings, to guard a knowledge humanity was not yet ready to wield. The seal, the legendary Ring of Solomon, did not vanish with him, but fragmented, like a relic too potent for one age to contain. Pieces of it appear in stories across cultures. In Ethiopia, it manifests through the bloodline said to descend from the union of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, a matriarchal branch bearing sacred knowledge veiled as royal heritage. In Arabic lore, the ring slips between worlds, falling into the hands of Ifrits and sages alike, a test of worth and alignment. In the esoteric tradition of the West, the seal becomes not a literal artifact, but a symbol. The hexagram, the Star of David, representing the fusion of opposites, fire and water, above and below, human and divine. But beneath this geometry lies a more subtle secret, the seal as a cipher, an inner code, not an object to be possessed, but a state to be embodied. Solomon's legacy is not stored in scripture alone, but encrypted in the architecture of the mind. In dreams, he appears not as a bearded patriarch, but as a luminous figure clad in paradox, a being who speaks in riddles and silence. Psychologists of the soul, mystics, poets, even some Jungians, have identified Solomon as an archetype, the wise king, the alchemical monarch, the one who holds the tension of opposites without collapse. In Jungian terms, Solomon is the self, the totality of the psyche, striving toward integration. His dialogues with demons mirror the confrontation with the shadow. His rulings reveal the balance between logos and eros, reason and empathy. In this light, his descent into idolatry becomes not a moral failure, but an initiation, a passage through the chaos necessary to mature wisdom beyond the theoretical. He is the soul's dream of sovereignty, the image of what happens when consciousness grows large enough to contain both serpent and dove. And yet his presence lingers also in structure, in the blueprints of cathedrals, mosques, and secret chambers of Masonic lodges. The Solomonic pillar, Jachin and Boaz, rises in temples across the world, not as mere ornament, but as keys, guardians of polarity and gateways to interior knowledge. The very act of walking between them is an initiation, whether understood or not. His name, invoked in ritual, does not summon a ghost, but opens a corridor in the psyche, a spiral descending into forgotten memory. He is not called to appear, he is awakened within. For Solomon, like the temple, like the ring, like the word, was always meant to be inwardly realized. Myths tell of his continued work in secret realms. In some versions, he lives beneath the foundations of the ruined temple, suspended in timeless prayer, surrounded by scrolls and symbols too vast for the human eye. In others, he serves as guardian at the threshold of wisdom, the one who appears in moments of deep inner transformation. It is said that when a seeker truly commits to the path, the real path, not of appearances, but of dissolution, the spirit of Solomon emerges like a guide through the labyrinth. He does not offer answers, but better questions. He asks the seeker what they're willing to lose for truth. He asks if they're ready to marry heaven and hell inside their own soul. For that was always the secret of his power, not domination, but integration. He didn't bind demons to oppress them. He bound them to purpose, to meaning. There are echoes of Solomon in every genuine occult tradition. The Sufis speak of a hidden king who walks unseen through the centuries, known only to those with inward eyes. The Kabbalists trace the tree of life back to the temple's inner design, mapping each sphere like chambers in the mind of God, each path a verse in Solomon's song. Even in Gnostic scriptures, we find whispers of a king who knew the names of the eons, who held the secret of Sophia's fall and the redemption of matter. He was not just a node in history, he was a tuning fork struck by the divine, and all those who follow the sound find themselves walking into mystery, losing their names, finding their essence. To speak of Solomon now is not to speak of past glory, but of present access. He is still here, not in dusty texts, but in thresholds, in those moments when the rational mind collapses beneath the weight of awe, in the shiver one feels when silence becomes alive, in the gaze of someone who knows without knowing why. He is the part of us that hungers not for certainty, but for the kind of truth that humbles the soul and opens the heart with terror and wonder. He is the guardian of the inner temple, not because he guards it from others, but because he is it. To reach Solomon is to enter oneself and to find the throne within. His kingdom was never conquered because it was never physical. It was always a domain of symbol, of sacred language, of vibration and form. Its borders are drawn in myths, in motifs, in archetypes that recur like dreams too deep to forget. And so long as there are those who seek not the comfort of belief, but the fire of knowing, Solomon lives in every whispered prayer beneath the stars, in every book that trembles with mystery, in every heart that dares to open not to certainty, but to wonder.